Hi, this is Eric Durek, and welcome to this edition of Med Health Fit, the TV show that integrates wellness and healthcare. And tonight, we are privileged to have a healthcare practitioner from the Santa Barbara area, Dr. Kendall Hessemer. Welcome, Kendall. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me tonight.
Well, my pleasure. You are a naturopathic physician, which we'll talk about in a second, and you also are a yoga instructor. You do that in private practice, but you also teach classes out at the UC Santa Barbara Nutrition Education, and you're involved with the Work Strong program, which we'll also get into in just a second. So the first question I always ask people who come on the show is tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Absolutely. So I am a naturopathic doctor trained at National University of Natural Medicine in Portland.
Okay.
So go Pacific Northwest.
Oh boy.
And I moved down here to get some more sun. And so what inspired me to find this path of health is just being really ill as a child, actually. I grew up with chronic respiratory infections and was always in the hospital. And I just decided this is no life for a child, right? I couldn't breathe, I had asthma. And so I was taking these medications, and finally I looked at my parents and I said, you know what? I don't really want to take these anymore. And they were super concerned.
Yes, very shocked.
And so I ended up seeing an osteopath in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and they told me about homeopathy. And so since that time, that doctor turned me on to naturopathic medicine, and I started researching and trying to help people who wouldn't have to endure the same kinds of things that I did.
Right. I absolutely think that the path that you have chosen is a very good one, because I started out in the field of exercise physiology. I mean, I was physical education and exercise, so they try really hard in the allied health care sciences to look to see what medicine is doing. But when I started working here in Santa Barbara in a medical research center, I started meeting people in Santa Barbara who were holistic health practitioners. And that really excited me. I was a member of the Somatic Society, I was a member of the Noetics, I joined all of these places, and what I was trying to do was to merge two different professions, which I think can be merged. But I've seen in the last decade just what's going on in medicine with the cost overruns and just the massive influence of pharmaceuticals, and you know, hospitals the size of cities, and I just say to myself, there's got to be a better way of doing it, which is why I think that naturopathic medicine and holistic health care, yoga, I mean, yoga is one of those fields that's just, there's so much research. There's there's a medical yoga association. You know, I'm on the board for the medical the Yoga Fit business. And so I just think that there's a lot of stuff. Now you've been involved with naturopathics for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. How long have you been?
So I've been practicing over 10 years.
Okay.
And or just about 10 years now, and I have been studying this forever, so I feel like I've been always interested. And I always had the dream of combining them. So yoga, naturopathic medicine, mindfulness, all ways that we can take care of ourselves out in nature, the way that I think we are intended to be living our lives, and bringing that into the modern day setting.
Right. And I see a bigger movement for that as well, and I've talked about it with other guests on the show about things like urban farms, you know, living in New York City but having one of those towers that you can grow your own vegetable. I mean, 25 years ago, you go down to the grocery store on 59th and 3rd and go get your food.
Sure.
But today people are really looking at this kind of stuff, and of course, you know from living in Santa Barbara that we've got one of the best farmers markets around. We've got shopping centers like Lazy Acres and even Trader Joe's, which is got some really quality products year round. Plus we have people that sell locally that you can buy from right on the street sometimes.
Yeah.
You have so there's a really big selection here, I think, in terms of the nutrition aspect. But my next question, I'm gonna move a little bit into yoga with you.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, two-part question, a little bit about yoga. What style do you practice? How long you've been doing it? But do you use it just for people to come in and do yoga, or do you actually look for seniors or people who may have musculoskeletal issues that can work with you because of your naturopathic work? I mean, you're a yoga instructor plus, you know what I mean? So.
I think that how I want to approach anything is really about the realm of prevention. So how we've been educated our whole life to look at illness, how we look at wellness, are two very different things. And so with yoga, I wouldn't say I necessarily seek out a particular client. How I'm going to work with a yoga prescription, if you will, is to really integrate that into an overall wellness aspect. So looking at nutrition, looking at mindfulness and mindset, looking at just daily activities like drinking water that we forget about. So yoga is just a part of everything that I do.
Okay.
And how I practice, I would say, is more of a vinyasa style approach, alignment based, and then also looking at how that impacts our nervous system, how that impacts our thoughts, how that impacts how we show up in our day-to-day life.
Right. Explain alignment based for the audience.
Yeah, alignment based is something where you're using the muscles and the joints in the way that they're intended to be used. So let's say you're in a posture where you're straightening the legs.
Okay.
And a lot of times we tend to over straighten because more is more, right? But really, when we can look at it from the aspect of just giving that little bend to the knee and allowing the hamstrings and the quadriceps and the whole area around the knee to realign itself properly, we're not putting any undue stress on those joints, either above or below as well.
I do, one of the programs that I do as part of my job at the university is 10 to 15 minute stretch programs across campus. So I'll go. Today I met the custodians at 4 o'clock. Tomorrow I'll meet the electricians at 11:30. 10 o'clock I will meet another group, and then at 3:30 I've got some of the people from the finance department. And we usually stretch indoors or outdoors wherever we can.
Wonderful.
And interesting question about the alignment is that most of my life, when I do a standing hamstring stretch, I use a slight bend at the knees. And I will actually have my students tell me, well, Eric, you should keep your legs straight. And then I have to explain to them why I don't, because it puts a lot of pressure on, I throw out the popliteal muscle or something, it puts a lot of pressure on the nerves in the back of my leg. It's the way my leg is structured. So I just use a slight bend in both knees, and it works perfect.
It does.
It works
And
perfect. So.
when you look at that from a muscular perspective, and then you add the fascia into that, any strain we put on that whole body system is going to impact our thoughts in the long run.
Okay, you shouldn't have mentioned fascia, because I'm reading a book by a guy from, I think, the University of Wisconsin now, based on the work of the guy in Maine, whose name I can never think of, but he's the world's leading authority in fascia education, and he does his 5-day workshops, and he charges a ton of money. And essentially, fascia is the area of medicine today that the lymphatic system was 25 years. No thought about the lymphatic systems until people started getting lymphedema from breast cancer and lymphedema in the feet. So now we have lymphatic drainage specialists, and people are really looking at and now we have fascia. And basically, in this book that I'm reading, which is absolutely phenomenal, is that the fascia system has its own waterway. It transports fluids, amazing, and just the structural integrity. And I remember I just read some stuff about knee injuries and stuff and back injuries. Like, why don't people who have injuries like this heal? And it's not the muscle. The guy said it's the fascia. And so, are you an expert in fascia treatment, or are you just like myself? Another area that you're reading about that you can apply in your day-to-day work?
I did study fascia as well. I did a lot of craniosacral training through my naturopathic medical training. And so that integrated with yoga has been one of the most important pieces, I think, to not only, again, integrate the musculoskeletal system, because Those are our muscles and our structural integrity that hold us up.
Right.
But when our fascial system is stressed, it impacts our immune system, it impacts our nervous system negatively, and I think that's where we start to see some of this chronic disease start to set in the long run.
Well, I actually, remember hearing someone who was a big proponent of certain types of systems, and they would make comments about it, but no one really spoke about fascia, and I would venture the next 5 years are going to be this huge growth industry for fascial training, pressure point fascia, realignment of the body, taking a 93-year-old person and making their muscles like a 60-year-old, because I just think it's that important. And I just think, and again, in the book that I read, it's like how much medical education is devoted to fascia? Zero. It's the white crap that you cut through to get to the really important stuff. And I just remember how fascinated I was when I took gross anatomy and just saw this stuff. Not just the IT band, because that's an athletic thing.
Sure.
But it's the whole thing about this stuff that's just between the skin, and it was amazing. All right, I'm going to.
Well, it's so exciting.
But we'll do a fascia show sometime in the
good.
future. Not fashion show, but fascial show.
A little bit of both.
Yeah, and so anyway, okay, so I'm going to come back to question 3 because we're on yoga. It's been growing the past 20 years. What do you think is the biggest contribution of yoga to sort of health promotion now? I mean, you mentioned alignment.
Absolutely.
You mentioned this mindfulness, mind-body practice, which a lot of people who jog and stuff, they just don't, they got their headphones on or whatever. Is there one thing that you think yoga is doing that other types of practices are not?
What I've always loved about yoga, and it's something that I thought I would actually maybe get tired of, is that it is a practice of the mind. And any athletic endeavor I've ever done in my life, I feel like, okay, I've done that. I'm kind of bored. I'm not going to show up to it. And what yoga does, I think, is allows you to show up to your mat every single day, or wherever you are, if you're outside or you're on a wood plank, wherever you're practicing. And it allows you to show up in a way that's honest and real. So you show up to your mind, you show up to your body, you show up to your spirit, and it is what it is that day.
And I understand the connection aspect of it, even if you're just sort of connecting to yourself, because I've been a gym guy for 40 years. And I read a really interesting quote about, of all things, CrossFit. And one of the things that people like about CrossFit is that you have training partners, and the workout of the day, the WOD. You have a workout, and you're responsible to your training partner or your group. So you actually have to converse with people. And I work out in a gym where I don't talk to anybody except the people I know. And once in a while I converse, but I have very little time to do it. But I also know too that I might be missing something because of the nature of health clubs in the United States. It's that you work on your own, do this, whatever, and then you leave, and you have very little connection with people. So I think that that's a really big thing about where exercise in this country is going, is that there's this connectiveness that people kind of need to be working with. You're also an educator. I mean, not just working at the university, but you consider yourself to be probably a teacher first and foremost. And before the show, I gave you my notes to write some little things on, and of course, you wrote a few things. Tell me about this program that you're involved with called, is it Rewild Fitness?
Rewild Health.
Rewild Health.
Yeah.
Okay. So what is it?
And so I guess more so than feeling like a teacher, I'm a lifelong learner, right? I'm sure you feel that way too.
Yes.
And any time that I'm uncovering an aspect about nutrition or meditation or any aspect of yoga and movement, I'm like, wow, there's just so much more to uncover. And how do I bring those together in a way that's accessible? So Rewild Health to me was really born out of this really desiring to connect it all the pieces together. And with that, I think that looking at your basic daily activities really add up to a lifetime of health.
Okay, so I want to dig a little deeper here. Is it a program you sign up for? Is it a building you go to? Is it an app you download?
Yeah.
What is it?
So I teach it right now as part of some yoga teacher trainings that I'm a part of.
Okay.
And I also integrate it with my client work. So you can work with me one-on-one, or we can work in a small group setting. And I'm also now starting to enter into more of a corporate and school setting as well. Because of my work at UCSB and seeing the great need for students to learn about how to take care of themselves in this stressful environment that we can really find ourselves in. I don't want to perpetuate that kind of stress. I want to help ease it. So through nutrition and all the pillars that I've looked at here, I think it can be really useful.
So your nutrition education concentrates on what?
It first focuses on nourishment. So how do we nourish ourselves? And that's a very basic question, I think, that we forget about. The first things to generally go in our life when we're feeling stressed out, you might agree, is stress or sleep. So we don't sleep enough.
Yeah, that's, and I never thought about that until recently, but it has moved up the food chain with me almost to number one now.
Yeah.
Because at my age, I'm just having trouble sleeping some nights, and it is really, it can be a frustrating thing when you go to bed tired and you get up at 3 in the morning or 1 in the morning, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's a very bizarre, I never had that problem.
Yeah.
So.
And especially when you are someone who teaches about health, right? Like, we certainly shouldn't have sleep problems, right?
Well,
so it is.
But one of the things that I think about health is that when I was in graduate school and had classes in counseling and psychology, some of the teachers were very animate about the fact that, you can't be a good counselor unless, of course, you may have suffered from some of the things that you're talking about. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do understand as you go through life, there are just things that happen to you, and you can use them to be a negative influence, like sleep problems or weight gain or whatever, or you can use them as sort of a stepping stone, a tool that you can actually get to something better. And that's what I'm hearing from you, is that people with weight loss might do a medically based thing, and they're frustrated, but then they look at sort of the holistic aspect of it, and then a door opens. And that's, I think, from what I'm hearing from you, this is kind of what Rewild Health is about.
And returning to those instinctual ways of being. We were meant to be outside, and there's so many ways that nature cures us that we don't even realize. But research is starting to come out in that area of how fractals, just being out under the trees and smelling them, being around the ocean and listening to the sound of the ocean, or seeing those patterns that show up in the waves. Those are all ways that our nervous system resets itself and soothes ourselves. And if we're not doing that on a consistent basis, I think that stress, anxiety, and depression is going to continue to rise.
Well, which is, before I moved to California a long time ago, I lived in New York City, and I just remember that, the whole aspect of Central Park is just this oasis in the middle of the city where almost everyone goes, and sometimes they just go there and plop on the grass, which is an amazing thing. And I think that, again, what I see happening in sort of urban environments is that there's a transition going on now. I just had my son move to Detroit, Michigan in August, and I've spent a little bit of time downtown after not being there for almost 30 years. And downtown Detroit in the 70s and 80s was not a very nice place to be. But there's this renaissance that's happening there with food, with these urban gardens. They're taking some of these, they're making things a little bit different. And I just think that there are some architects and some holistic health people who may be having coffee someday and saying, this is what we can do. And I do think that we're seeing changes in a lot of cities, Pittsburgh, Detroit, even down in LA, there's things that are sort of happening. Santa Barbara's not like most towns. And if you've lived in Portland, you've been in Milwaukee, you've been in other places, this is way different than most places. But I think that's why a lot of people like to be here, because they do have, and I'm a mountain guy, I like to go up in the mountains sometimes, ride my bike up there, but when you get up there you can just sort of see all of these interesting things, and so there's that holistic aspect there. All right, you work one-on-one with clients, you mentioned, you work with small groups. Are the benefits the same? Can people sort of get to where they want to go if they're working with 3 or 4 or one-on-one?
I think it's interesting based on something you brought up earlier with going to the gym and just kind of staying to yourself. And while there's a quality where we need to just touch in with ourselves from time to time, I think that there's also a connectedness that's been lost in the age of technology. So I think that building community around health is going to be something where we really look at collaborative care and figure out how to establish health in a way that is a daily practice rather than something we wait until we're sick.
Yeah, so that actually leads into the next question here. Do you see more research in the area of holistic health? There's a lot more interest in functional medicine, energy medicine, the whole pain management issue in the United States with the opioid crisis. All of these things may be beneficial in terms of things like naturopathics, yoga, et cetera. You know, where do you think may be sort of the biggest benefits? I mean, if you were a betting woman and someone said to you, Dr. Kendall, you know, weight loss, depression, back pain, you know, what do you think is going to be sort of the major upswing here for the holistic health movement?
I think that it's already on its way, which is pretty amazing to me. I feel like even in the years that I've practiced, the awareness around naturopathic medicine, holistic health, going to see an acupuncturist, a chiropractor, and any holistic field has really increased. But we do have a long way to go. I bet you would agree with that too.
Yeah, well, and I actually see the, you know, like I say, pharmaceutical ads. I see bills being passed in state legislatures to mandate certain pharmaceuticals, vaccines, et cetera, and I'm seeing a bigger push in medicine to do more, you know, they're going into the whole data analytics and artificial intelligence and you know, electronic data management, all these kind of things. And a lot of it that I'm reading is how can we get people to stay in medicine, to do more with medicine, and to see sort of what we're doing in medicine. So it's really just, come on, just they want everyone to just stay with us, please stay with us. We've got all these cool things for you. And I just think that more and more people are beginning to see the value of the simple aspects. A good massage, acupuncture treatment, sitting down with someone and really talking about nutrition. Where have you been for the last 10 years? Where would you like to be in the next 5 or 10? And really, you know, working from that area. And you know, and that leads me into the next question here. I'm sort of looking at something here that I saw a very interesting report recently about yoga in prisons. And you're looking at a guy who grew up in a town in mid-Michigan that had at one time 6 prisons. I understand a little bit about the prison complex. Most of my friends from high school who didn't go to college worked in the prison. Their parents worked in the prisons. I understand the mentality of the whole prison issue. And when I saw a video piece about a year or so ago on yoga in prisons, I'm like, wow, that's a huge step forward. I understand they have animal programs and farming programs and all these things in prison to keep, you know, they had guys fighting fires, prisoners fighting fires up in Northern California. Fantastic. Yoga in prisons. Oh my God, tell me about that. You might not have done it, but I'm just saying that conceptually, that's amazing.
It's incredible. I think it's one of the most important things we could do is start to heal what is happening underneath. So there's mental health that we can address there. There's trauma. There is addiction. There's pain in people's bodies that needs to come out. And so anything that can promote that wholeness of well-being through yoga at prisons, wherever that is one of the most critical works that I think we're seeing a shift in this health paradigm.
Right, actually, I had a note here about home yoga care, you know, because I actually developed a course years ago in home health care, talking about exercise and nutrition and things, and I thought there was a huge need, and I actually spoke at the National Home Care Association one year, and people were like, oh, this is amazing. Of course, 10 years later, I don't really see a lot moving there because everything with that medical structure has to do with reimbursement. And if they can't get the reimbursement, it's really not that important. And I think the biggest shift in terms of medicine, because that was my last question, was, you know, in the next 20 years, we have to have a huge shift in this country away from these massively expensive medical procedures. You know, my mother just had a very small cancer tumor removed from her back. She spent 2 days in the hospital, $29,000. My daughter had her appendix out in Northern California 5 or 6 years ago. She was in the hospital for less than 24 hours. It was $59,000.
Wow.
And I'm in shock that procedures that could be done in an office, my mother's procedure could have been done in an office. And I scratch my head and I just say, and of course I pick it apart. I took lots of notes on my mother's care.
Yeah.
And I just, it's going to be an article someday. I'll be a blog, you'll read it.
Can't wait to read it.
Yeah. Anyway, but I see holistic health as a way out of our medical mess. And it really is a mess. I don't care. I mean, there's some brilliant doctors. The woman that I worked with years ago at Sansom Research, she was brilliant woman. But the whole issue of medicine is how can we make medicine better? How can we make the drugs better? How can we make the insulin injections or the vaccines better? How can we make the insulin pump or the external technology or the enteral nutrition better? And my issue from a guy who's worked on both sides of the fence is don't make this better. How can you prevention that you spoke about earlier in the show? How does a person's pancreas shrivel up and die in the first place?
Yeah.
How do we prevent
I want people
someone
to know that.
And again, and there may be some excellent ways in terms of a person who's pre-diabetic who has some of the blood work, and I love medicine for that. You can learn a lot from the blood work to see where they're going metabolically and then steer them into this path. Am I right?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Because the blood work tells you a lot,
Yeah.
and it doesn't even hurt much. So you can learn so much from that. And as a naturopath, do you recommend blood labs for?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about blood labs, which I've actually had Dr. Craig Brandman on the show, who's the CEO of Step One Health. It's one of the largest online blood companies in the United States, telling us about where blood labs are going. And now patients can go get their own.
They can.
Personal trainers can recommend blood labs. Go to our, Step One Health or wellnessrx.com or something and just go get your own blood. I think that
really
is a
important.
huge step.
It allows us to take the power of our health and responsibility of our health back into our own hands. And I think what you said earlier, just to bring that back around, is taking these teachings of what's happening with the pancreas, what's happening with your nervous system when you're not feeling that well, what's happening with your digestion.
Right.
So we know how to take care of it in a way that's preventative rather than waiting until we're sick and need to rely on this very expensive medical care.
Absolutely. So we've got a little less than a minute, and I want you to tell us some places that you teach in town, like Yoga Soup or something, or your own place, and then how can people contact you?
Great. So I teach at Yoga Soup teacher training
you do
starting
teach
this
at Yoga
January.
Soup.
It's like he knew. And I also teach up at UCSB, so I teach a weekly class there.
And do you have an office in town where people can see you as well?
I also see clients out of Yoga Soup, but a lot of the work I do is at people's homes or online.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how can people contact you? Website, phone number, email?
So I have my website is drkendallhessemer.com. You can also reach out to me on Instagram at Kendall Hessemer. I have a Facebook page, and I also can be emailed. So all that's available on the website.
And I have a funny feeling this is going to be the first of probably many interviews with you, because this is some really, really powerful stuff. So, Dr. Kendall Hessemer, local yoga instructor and naturopathic physician, thank you so much for being on the show. And this is Eric Durack for Med Health Fit. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time.